forget. 1 second. Oh, there we go. Good afternoon. So we're on at Erev Tanis Esther. So we have to learn about Purim. But we're going to learn something a little bit different about Purim than maybe what you've heard before. Go in a different direction. A surprising lesson. And the lesson we're going to learn is actually from Haman. So, a surprising teacher. We wouldn't think that we can learn from Haman. But we know that the Torah exists on a number of levels. There's what we would call the Pardes of the Torah. Pardes means an orchard. And so there's like that visual of entering into this orchard of learning and knowledge. But Pardes stands for Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Side. So Pshat is the simple understanding of how something could be understood. Rashi comes to teach the Pshat, right? He wants to teach the Pshutei Shel Mikra, the basic understanding of the text. Then we have Remez. Remez would be the world of hints and allegory. Not necessarily allegories. That's more that goes into Drash also, but like codes would be a good word for Remez. Rabbi Wolf likes the world of Remez, the world of gematrias, those types of things, right? That's the level of learning the Torah on the level of Remez. Then we have Drash, which is sort of like the expansion of the Torah and like filling in stories. And that is Medrash. That's what the role that Medrash plays. A lot of the stories that when we learn the Megillah, the Medrash plays a very important role because the Megillah gives us only so much information. The stories that we learn have only so much information, and the Medrash comes and sort of fills in all the other things that were happening as well. And then we have the level of Side. And the level of Side literally means secret. And in the world of Side, the way we approach something is that everything physical, this is like the world of Kabbalah, and as an extension of that, Chassidus, even though Chassidus really delves into all these levels, but in the world of Kabbalah, everything physical is representing something spiritual. So everything physical is representing something spiritual, either a level within God or an angel or some sort of place within the expanded, the spiritual universe, right? Some sort of level of chachma here, right? Like that's what everything physical is going to be representing, something spiritual. And on some level, we might say that can be like difficult to understand. But what that does is actually, when we learn the level of Side, what we're able to do is take any story and really adapt it to our own lives. Because on the level of Pshat, there are lessons we can learn from the story, but the story only happened once, right? The Megillah happened once, and it's not happening again with the same player. So in the world of Pshat, like I said, we can learn lessons from it that we could try to apply to our own lives, but it's something that happened and is done. On the level of Side, being that this is representing some sort of spiritual reality, that spiritual reality can exist right now, exactly happening right now. So that is the advantage of delving into the world of Side. And so we're going to delve a little bit into that world today. And we're going to analyze a little part of the story of the Megillah. So this is sort of actually one of the turning points in the Megillah. Until this point, everything is sort of going pretty bad. And then at this point, the Megillah starts to take a turn, and we start to slowly see the Yad Hashem and how things are slowly turning in favor of the Jewish people. What happens? Haman is very upset at Mordechai. And so his wife tells him a plan that he should build a gallows and hang Mordechai on the gallows. And he's so excited about the idea that he can't wait till morning. He runs out in the middle of the night to the courtyard of the king and is getting ready to erect this gallows to hang Mordechai. That same night, Balaylahu, and we know the person who's reading it reads this part extra loud because, like we said before, Balaylahu, that's when the turning point comes. And if you want to review that, last year we spent a long time on this Balaylahu. We spent a couple of classes, but you could find them on YouTube. But Balaylahu, this is the turning point of the Purim story. What happens? A king can't sleep. So when he can't sleep, I turn on like a boring podcast or some sort of sleep meditation on my phone. The king calls in his readers also. So it's an old trick. It's not new that listening to something can help you fall asleep. The king can't sleep, so he calls in his chroniclers to read to him from his royal chronicles. And they come in, and he is reminded of an incident that happened earlier with Mordechai, that Mordechai saved his life with the story of Big Son and Seresh. So he's reminded of this incident, and he realizes that he never rewarded Mordechai for this saving of his life, which is a pretty big deal that he saved the king's life. And so he gets up and he's like trying to think what he can do to reward Mordechai, and he sees Haman pacing in the courtyard of the palace. Why? Because he was setting up the gallows for Mordechai. So he calls Haman in, and the king asks Haman, what should I do what should be done to the man, right, that the king wants to honor? And it's actually very interesting because the Megillah even tells us what Haman thinks to himself. It's not often that in Tanakh we actually hear the inner dialogue in the head of someone. It's usually much more often the expressed words that we'll hear. But it's interesting. It says Haman thought to himself, who would he want to honor but himself? He's the king's right-hand man. And so he says that, this is what he says, I would take the crown and the royal garments, and I would put this man on the king's horse and have him be paraded around town, saying, thus shall be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. That's what Haman says. And Achashverosh says, oh, that's a great idea. We'll get the royal garments and put this man, and we will put, now he reveals who he wants to reward. He says, you'll take Mordechai and you will bring him, you Haman will bring him the royal garments and put him on the horse, and you will parade him through town saying this. It's interesting, Haman suggests the crown as well. Achashverosh is like, I'm not putting my crown on somebody else, right? That's, especially if we understand a little bit how the kings changed very often in those times, right? Like, it's a little bit of a risky move to put the crown onto somebody else. But the royal garments, that's definitely a show of kavod, riding on the horse. And they agree to this plan, and basically it totally turns around. From here is Haman's downfall. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this story apart a little bit, and we're going to see how every element in the story actually we're going to make like a little list of what it represents. And we're going to learn a lesson from the story based on what it represents, okay? So, Achashverosh, what do we think Achashverosh represents? It's good. What do we think Achashverosh represents? It's something that you've probably heard before. Who does the king Achashverosh represent in the Purim story? Hashem, exactly. The king represents Hashem. In the Purim story in general, we know that Hashem's name is not mentioned in the Megillah, and that when it says the king, we can read it either as the king Achashverosh or as the king Hashem. So the king is representing Hashem. Mordechai represents the godly soul. And that makes sense for a number of reasons. First of all, we can think about Mordechai. His role in the story is to be the role of the good advisor. He's the one who knows the truth, right? And he's sort of informing everyone else about the truth. And that's within us. We have something within us that knows the truth, right? That is in touch with what is right. And if we listen to the advice of our godly soul, then we'll end up in better situations. And if we don't listen to the advice of our godly soul, we end up in worse situations, like we see in the story. Also, in general, we talk about how our godly soul is like this collective, the collective Jewish soul all together. In Tanya, we talk about how the leader of the generation is basically what enables us to get in touch with our godly soul. There's this concept of the leader of the generation being the neshama klalis, the general soul. And what does that mean? It means that sometimes it can be hard for us to access the soul that's within us. Sometimes it can be hard for us to access our own voice. And by the leader of our generation enables us to get in touch with our own soul. So that would make sense that Mordechai, as the leader and also as that like good voice, would represent the godly soul. Haman, on the other hand, represents, in this case, it's kind of a funny parallel because we're talking about a trait, but the trait, I guess, is going to be personified over here because we're going to have it be representing, a person is representing it. Haman represents the trait of arrogance, which again is not hard to understand, especially in this story we see right away when he thinks that the king is wishing to honor somebody, we think about Haman, right? And I know we a lot of times talk about Haman coming from Amalek. And Amalek represents the idea also of arrogance, but like extreme arrogance to the state of a certain level of coldness where I'm totally removed from everything. Here we're going to be talking about Haman representing not as an intense level of arrogance. This is going to be the level that we would call gasus haruach. An emboldened, puffed up, that's the word really, is this puffed up spirit. And so Haman represents arrogance. Now, the king's garments represent mitzvahs, because we talk about a lot, and Tanya talks about how the mitzvahs are the garments of the king. The garments of the king, we see how they serve to connect us with Hashem, right? The garments of the king they're not the king himself, right? But they still fit through the garments. You can see the shape of the king, right? They adapt to the king, they're possessions of the king, and they express who the king is. The specific garments that he's wearing. Why is it such a big deal that the person who's being rewarded is wearing the garments? Is because these garments represent the king, right? Everyone knows when they look at them. And that's why clothes are very powerful, because everyone can, the way people interact with us is the first thing they see is how we present ourselves and the garments that we wear, either the physical garments or sometimes it can be something else, but that's sort of like something that we wear to show who we are. And so the mitzvahs are a way that we connect with Hashem, their Hashem, sharing with us how we can connect with him. Then we have the horse. This is an interesting one. The horse represents the letters of Torah and Tefillah, because the letters themselves are basically like a horse, something that carries something else, right? The letters contain meaning. But there's a very powerful thing that even if you don't understand the words of Torah or even the words of Tefillah, if we have focus just to connect to Hashem, what happens when we daven or we say these words of Torah, we can still be sort of ride upon them, right? We can still ride upon them. They can still take us to places that we can't reach ourselves because they are godly vessels, right? The letters themselves contain holiness. And then lastly, we have the crown. And the crown represents the revelation of Hashem. Okay, so we have a long list of things and what they represent. I should really have a board today, but I do not, alas. Okay, so I'll go through them quickly again, okay? So we have Achashverosh is Hashem. Mordechai is the godly soul. Haman is arrogance. The garments are mitzvahs. The horse are the letters of Torah and Tefillah. And the crown is revelation of Hashem. Now, if we these are all the characters that showed up in this little story that we were talking about. I mean, the garments are not exactly characters, but they're something significant that come up in the story. So, if we go through what Let's just go straight to Achashverosh because it'll get too complicated. What Achashverosh says is he tells Haman. So we're just, instead of saying Haman, I'm going to now plug in. You know how you can take the words and plug them in? What's that game where you like choose a noun? What is it? No, like, you know what I'm talking about. Like you ask someone to choose a noun, a verb, Mad libs. Yeah. Basically, we're gonna plug it into the sentence, okay? So the king, who's Hashem? Sorry, I messed up. Hashem tells arrogance to take the godly soul, to give it Torah and mitzvahs and the letters of Torah and Tefillah. Right? That's basically what is going on over here. Like Hashem is telling arrogance to give something to the godly soul. Now, that's a very strange thing because I think probably one of the worst things that we think we can be, especially if you're someone who learns Chassidus, is the worst thing you can be is someone who is arrogant. The worst thing you can have is arrogance. Arrogance is seen as something that is a klipa. It keeps us away from Hashem. Right? That's what it does. It keeps us away from Hashem. It's this sensing ourselves very strongly, and that's what disconnects us from sensing the godliness that's within us. That's what disconnects us from the people around us, is our arrogance, is this gaiva. So how is it that we are going to be utilizing gaiva for good? How can we use arrogance in a positive way? And that's what we're going to learn from this story. The role of arrogance and how we utilize arrogance positively. Like I said, it's going to be a surprising Purim message, but that's what we're going to learn from this story. Okay, so just to define a little bit, what is arrogance? So gasus haruach means seeing yourself and not others. That's what gasus haruach means. There's the famous story, and I think I've definitely said it in this room before, but I'll just say it quickly, that there was a very poor man, and he used to give a lot of tzedakah, and he came to the Baal Shem Tov complaining about his poverty, and the Baal Shem Tov blessed him that he should be rich. And he did indeed become very, very wealthy. And one day the Baal Shem Tov is going through this man's town, and he visits him in his home, and he sees that there are poor people knocking at the door, and he doesn't answer the door to anyone. He's not giving anyone money. And the Baal Shem Tov notices that in the front of this man's house, there's a big mirror. Like in his foyer, there's a big mirror, as people often have. Yeah, you can check out how you look before you leave. And the Baal Shem Tov goes to this man. What's the difference between a mirror and a window? They're both made out of glass, right? A mirror and a window are both made out of glass. But with a window, you see outwards. You see what's on the outside. With a mirror, you just see yourself. He said, what's the difference between them? That the mirror is coated in silver. So what happens? Kesef, silver, can often create this difference between a person, between being able to look outwards to others or only being able to see themselves. Because what does it do? It gives us this gasus haruach. It inflates our ego, it inflates our spirit of ourselves, and all of a sudden I'm no longer able to see others and I'm only seeing myself. And I'm not saying this happens to all wealthy people. This just happened in this story, right? But like there needs to be a recognition of where does my money come from? And nothing is coming from me alone. Every gift that I have, everything that I have that has a potential to inflate me is really just coming from Hashem. And how can I use this tool to better see others and to better be able to really be empathetic and move away from just being so small-minded that I can only see myself? But gasus haruach is that lack of ability to see others. And gaiva is being very boastful. I was listening to a class, someone was teaching about this, and he was saying that people who boast, people who actually are the things that people boast about, are too busy achieving those things and trying to obtain those things to boast about them, right? People who are boasting about things are usually Not really there yet, because if you truly were an incredible business person, you would be busy running your businesses. And if you are an amazing artist, instead of being boastful about it, you would be refining your craft, right? Like, let's be honest. There's always a disconnect between the boasting is a certain emptiness that doesn't allow us to, that is not true, right? It's not like truly achieving. There's a certain lack of alignment between who you are and what you want to achieve if you're going to be boasting about it. So Haman, we see he's very boastful, right? He holds himself high. He wants everyone to bow to him. He has this vision of power that is not 100% his, and again, eventually leads to his downfall. The king starts to feel very threatened by him, but because he's busy boasting that he is the most important, and automatically, when the king asks him how he wants to be honored, he says, "Oh, I want to wear the crown." Right? That's like that ultimate boast that he's saying, that he's sharing with the king, that I want to be the king, even though he's so far from that. So, how would we apply this idea to our avodas Hashem? Because we know that sometimes we can use tools in a negative way, and sometimes we could use them in a positive way, right? So in the negative sense, what would this element of arrogance be? It would be taking a lot of personal satisfaction in your avodas Hashem. Like really like feeling, we've all met someone, or maybe in ourselves, who thinks that they're better than everyone else because of their religiousness. And you can get you feel it off of them, that they're looking down at other people because they feel like they're observing in a better way, right? That their experience of halacha is more meticulous, or their understanding of the way things should be is the right way. And when there are people who are very meticulous in halacha and who spend so much time serving Hashem, but you see that they don't bother other people about it, and they don't put other people down, and they don't judge other people. But you can tell when someone is judging other people and someone is putting other people down. Why are they observing this and this? Why are they serving Hashem in this way? They're serving Hashem in this way to feed themselves, because it makes themselves feel good, and it makes themselves feel special. And so the thing that they sort of boast about, or the space that inflates them and doesn't allow them to truly see others, is their avodas Hashem. Right? And that often can sometimes happen. The interesting thing is that it says in the Gemara that a Talmid Chacham should have 1/8 of gaiva. So we're not supposed to be completely gaivaless. First of all, that would probably be impossible. That's not necessarily something we can, unless you're born as a tzaddik, you can't really get rid of this entirely. But a Talmid Chacham is actually supposed to have 1/8 of gaiva. Now we're going to break this down further. Okay, let's start here. Generally, how do we define Talmid Chacham? Talmid Chacham we think of as a learned person, right? That there's someone who learns a lot of Torah, they're a Talmid Chacham. But if we actually look at what the words mean, Talmud means a student of, right? A Talmud is a student of. Chacham, what's Chachma? Chachma is, if we look at Chachma as the first of the spheres, right? Chachma is the highest level of knowledge of God that we can have. When we talk about Chachma, we're talking about the highest level of knowledge of God that we can have. When someone really, truly senses Hashem, that's a person who has Chachma, right? But this person doesn't yet have Chachma. They're not a Chacham. They are a Talmid Chacham. They are a student of Chachma. They are someone who is pursuing the knowledge of Hashem. Someone who is looking to, we're still a work in progress, right? We're still a work in progress. We're looking to get to that space where we could have that ultimate Chachma, that ultimate knowledge of Hashem. And what that ultimate knowledge of Hashem does is completely eradicates all ego and arrogance that exists within us. Because once you know Hashem, how can you bring yourself into the picture? It's like yourself is going to become completely aligned with Hashem. But if you're still in the process, right, like most of us probably are, and in this case, most of us are Talmidei Chachamim, students of Chachma, you need to have 1/8 of arrogance. So let's do the math. 1/8 is 1/64. right? So you're supposed to have 1/64 of arrogance. So how much arrogance would be too much? Would be a 63rd, right? Because when it comes to fractions, we go down, right? So a 63rd of arrogance would be too much. 1/64 is okay. 63 is the same. We're getting a little bit of the remez in here too. 63 is samach gimel. So samach gimel, if we reverse that, that is gas. Like we said before, this gasus haruach. So there are different types of arrogance. There's a type of arrogance that leads us to gasus, which means gasus means that it's dense, it's not refined. But then there is arrogance. If we go to 64th, 63rd is already too much. That's going to make you be coarse. That's going to make you not be able to see past yourself. But a 64th is fine. A 64th is fine. And let's think about this for a second, because it's like that, like we mentioned before, it's like that mirror, right? If your sense of yourself becomes stronger and stronger, what it does is blocks you from the stronger you're feeling. When you're very, let's say you go into a crowd and you're very self-conscious. You're very self-conscious. It's not a place that you're comfortable being in. The more self-conscious you are, the less you're going to be able to see anyone else, right? The less attention you're paying to anyone else, because who are you paying all the attention to is only yourself. And everyone will tell you, no one's paying attention to you because everyone else is also only paying attention to themselves, right? But so the more self-conscious I am, the less, the more dense I sort of become, and the less I'm able to see others. But there is a way to, have arrogance in a way where it is productive. And that is, like we said before, when you are someone who has not yet achieved this level of chachma, right? You have not yet completely and totally aligned yourself with godliness. You haven't reached complete bittul. You still have a strong nefesh habahamis who exerts its own way. What would happen if you would serve Hashem completely and totally without seeing any gain from it, without seeing any personal gain from it? You would just say, I'm just going to altruistically, I see no gain from serving God. I see no gain from being religious. I'm just going to serve Hashem completely altruistically. But you still have a nefesh habahamis that wants to pursue itself, right? So I still have this level of ego within me, but it's not going to be, if it's not channeled towards holiness, it's going to automatically derail me when something else comes up. Right? I'm going to be trying to serve Hashem. But if I'm trying to serve Hashem from a completely altruistic place, when I'm really not at that place, there's a lack of acceptance of reality. Right? Like I've heard this from people who are giving like dating advice. Sometimes you're dating with your best self. Right? So you want to show up with your best self and maybe even your holiest self. So you'll say, oh, these things don't really matter to me, because you think that for your holiest self, those things don't matter. But then we have to tell that person, but hey, your nefesh habahamis is also getting married. Right? So if that person is not getting along with your nefesh habahamis self as well, then this is not going to be a good shidduch. Let's be real. Let's be realistic about where you're holding. Is only your godly soul getting married? No. Your nefesh habahamis is also getting married. Right? And so similarly over here, is only our godly soul engaged in our service of God? No, our whole self is engaged in our service of God. So if I pretend that I have no ego and I try to serve Hashem altruistically when I am not actually a completely altruistic person, that's not completely and totally aligned with who I am. Yes, I may have an altruistic part within me, but it is not completely and totally who I am, then that's going to backfire. It's going to have negative effects, which is why we need to introduce an element of ego. We need to introduce an element of gaiva, where, yes, I am able to acknowledge that, yes, serving God and being a religious Jew serves me on some level. It gives to me. I am getting some sort of personal pleasure or personal gain from this. Now, again, this needs to stay in check. We don't want it to get out of control. We don't want it to be like before, like we said, where it turns you into someone who's gas, who's not able to see others and who's going to put down other people, who thinks they're better than other people. That's not the point. The point is that I need to have just enough that I am able to stay committed with my whole self. And the example that is given is that the arrogance needs to be like the chaff on the wheat. Wheat, when it's growing, it has a little chaff around it, and the role of that chaff is to protect the wheat as it's growing. But then after you harvest the wheat and it goes through all the processes, I'm not sure of what all those processes are, eventually we're going to remove that chaff from the wheat. It's not really edible before we grind it down into flour or whatever else we do with it. So similarly, the arrogance, it serves as a protector for us as we're growing. While we're still growing up, right? We haven't yet reached, we're still a Talmid Chacham, we're not actually a Chacham, we're still in the learning process. We need to have that arrogance to sort of protect our fragile egos from completely abandoning the project. And then the point is, though, that I'm supposed to be able to outgrow it, right? I'm supposed to be able to eventually come to a space where I can divert that and become more altruistic. And then I remove the chaff from the wheat and allow it to, the main thing to shine. And this is something that can happen over and over in our lives, right? It's not a one-time thing. Oh, I'm going to grow up and then I'm going to get rid of the chaff and it's done. It's like as we keep growing from level to level, I have a new ego and I have a new arrogance and a new level of arrogance. Maybe it's getting subtler and subtler and subtler, or maybe it's getting more mature with each stage of life that I'm in. But the goal is to eventually be able to get rid of that arrogance, to be able to be truly aligned with God from that space, right? So now let's go back to our story. So Hashem says to arrogance, meaning that that the arrogance should give to the godly soul, right? What does the arrogance give to the godly soul? Mitzvahs and the words of Torah and Tefillah. That the arrogance is what enables the person, the small bit of arrogance is what enables the person to fully observe Torah and mitzvahs. That if I didn't have this small bit of arrogance, if I didn't have a small bit of self-interest, I never would get off the couch, right? Like if there wasn't any bit of myself in this picture, I wouldn't have the motivation to get something done. That arrogance serves as a motivation to actually engage in this process. But what does the king say arrogance can't give you? Arrogance can't give the godly soul the crown, right? Haman thinks he could give you the crown, but we say, no, you can't give the crown. The crown is the true revelation of Hashem. True revelation of Hashem we can't have while we're still in the state of arrogance, because then our filter is still on ourselves. So we can use the arrogance to grow, but our goal is to be able to get rid of it, right? To be able to get rid of that thing that lays over our hearts, that blocks us from the true revelation of Hashem, true godliness, which totally exceeds the self, right? So to be able to get in touch with that, we need to let go of ourselves. To be able to get the true revelation of Hashem himself, we need to be able to let go of ourselves, right? So it has its place and it has its role. And it's just a point of being in touch with the fact that I don't have to feel bad about enjoying my serving Hashem and feeling good about serving Hashem and seeing the benefits of being part of a community and all of these beautiful things that our religious life gives us. But there also has to come time, if we want to get true revelation of God, where we need to come to a space where we can say, let go of personal gains, because as long as personal gains are in the picture, I'm not reaching God himself. And I need to be able to step out of that space of personal gain to reach God himself. So it's like an interesting, it's like an ebb and a flow, right? Where we are sometimes very much in this world, where we're very much in our bodies and ourselves. And that's where we serve Torah and we do mitzvahs and we serve Hashem and we do mitzvahs and we learn Torah. Then there can also be moments of transcendence where we leave ourselves a little bit right? The going up and the coming down, right? So we also have these moments of having the true revelation. And then when you come back down after that true revelation, you're not going to go down back as low as you were before. Your ego, the arrogance that you get after you've received the revelation of Hashem is going to be a much more refined arrogance. Like we said, it's like that constant process of growth where it basically becomes more and more refined. So yes, that's just an interesting lesson from the Purim story, from the Megillah.